morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here today. My name is Cyndy McDonald, and I want to welcome you to my Friday Forum. This is a live stream show that I started in 2020 during COVID as a way for us all to come together and find support and basically find calm in the chaos. Well, we're back in the calm in the chaos stage for other reasons and looking at the future and college, higher education, admissions. I love bringing experts to you to share ideas, conversation. And today I'm so fortunate to have with me John Durante, who is a proud alumnus of Stony Brook University. And I'm going to show you all about him as we get started. He has a podcast, he has a book, and he's talked to hundreds of admissions officers and has, from a parent and an educator's perspective, things to share with us. So welcome, John. I'm glad to have you here today.
It's truly my honor and pleasure, Cindy. Thank you so much for having me. And I have to give you a shout out as the best UCLA Extension program professor. So I want to also mention that I was your student. So thank you again for having me.
You're very well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you're I'm very glad to have you here. And that's the other thing. We meet the most wonderful people through the UCLA Extension. I love teaching in the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program. And I've just had phenomenal students like yourself and many others, and many other people on this call are also from the UCLA. So as you're all coming in today, go ahead and let John know. Let him know where you're from. And if you did a program, whether it was UCLA or other programs, go ahead and put in the chat. We'd love to know a little bit, know your name, your location, and if you did one of the certificate programs, and if so, which one. So as everybody is joining us today, we're going to have a really good conversation this week about admissions from the admissions officers' perspectives. So John, you can see we've got people already coming in. UC Irvine, UCLA, California, New Jersey. Phil's been in one of my UCLA essay classes that I've done as well. So I'm glad to see, you can see we've got all these wonderful people coming to us today. As you're entering and putting in your name and location, let me do just a little introduction for you, John. As I mentioned, John is a proud alumnus of the Stony Brook University. He's devoted over 30 years to education, both as a teacher and now as administrator. He is a principal at a high school in New York. He has a deep commitment to working with students and families through the college search process. And this then inspired you to launch a new podcast, and that was done. The College Admissions Process podcast was started in 2022. So, and as we were talking before we came on, I know it has been widely received. John is going to receive a special award, a media award at the upcoming NACAC conference. So congratulations, John. We're
Thank you
so
so
proud
much.
of you and appreciate that your hard work and your um, striving to bring more understanding, transparency, and just approachableness to this. So, and also, he's also written a book. So, here is your book straight from the admissions office. So, I will have links to all of this in the show notes when we're done. So, glad to have you here, John. And I know school is getting ready to start for you there in New York pretty soon.
Yep, absolutely. Next week, the teachers are in next week and students are in the week after. And honestly, I can't wait. It's really quiet around here without the teachers and the students,
It
which
just
is
doesn't
fine for
seem.
a little bit, but I miss the kids.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem the same at all. I imagine you're the kind of principal that's out there during lunch, during breaks, during passing periods, and just very visible with your students and your administration, your faculty and staff. So
Absolutely.
tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you go from from a teacher to an administrator to this path on college, the college process?
Thank you so much again, Cindy, for having me, and welcome everyone out there. Again, my name is John Durante. I am the proud principal of Syosset High School. I grew up actually in Brooklyn, New York, which is not too far from Syosset, within an hour driving. But I went to Stony Brook University out on Long Island, and at the age of 22, graduated and was fortunate enough to get a job as a high school world language teacher in this place called Syosset High School. And at the time, being from the city, I knew very little about Long Island or Syosset, but I'm proud to say that I just completed my 31st year at Syosset High School. I was a teacher for 6 years. I was the dean of discipline for 2 years, the assistant principal for 8 years, and I'm proud that I just completed my 15th year, starting my 16th year as the high school principal. And so this community, you could tell, obviously, I love it. I grew up here, and there's nothing that I wouldn't do for my school community. But coincidentally, what led me to the work with the college admissions process is the work that I did with my own daughters. Alyssa right now is 24 years old. She's about to start her second year as a mathematics teacher. And Juliana just graduated Sacred Heart University up in Connecticut, and she's about to start grad school. She wants to be a school psychologist. But when I went through the process with my own daughters, I truly felt the stress for the first time that the parents feel. As a high school principal, I had heard about it. I was trying to be compassionate, empathetic, and helpful. But when you go through it and you feel the stress, it's a whole other game, right? And so my youngest, who really didn't have the high academic grades that many students do in highly competitive high schools, and she had an IEP, an individualized education plan. And so the process was different and definitely very stressful. So I was one of those parents that would always reach out to the college admissions reps, and they were phenomenal. They truly were. They would call me back, they would email me back. If I saw them at a college fair, they always made the time to speak to me. And I was very honest with them. I would say, hey, this is my daughter's profile. Should she even apply? And I would say, give it to me between the eyeballs. I'm a city kid. I could take it. And they were very
Don't
honest with me.
sugarcoat it, right?
Yeah, don't sugarcoat it, just be honest. And they truly were. They gave great insight, great advice. And I thought, wow, how amazing, this group of people are. And so I came up with the idea of what if I had a podcast where each episode is me talking to a college admissions rep about the ins and outs about their school, everything they offer in the classroom and beyond. But more importantly, could we pull the curtain back and really dive deep into your application review process? And I thought, I think I might be onto something. If I did something like this, there's probably a lot of people that would be interested. And so I reached out initially to some of the reps that I knew, and I was so pleased and panicked at the same time because immediately I had about 5 people that said they would do it. Now, at that point in time, Cindy, I didn't know how to record. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know how to get it onto Spotify, Apple, and all these different platforms that the podcast is on now. So, like any other good educator, I went to Google, did a lot of searching, and as of today, I have 322 episodes live on the podcast called the College Admissions Process Podcast. And I'm just meeting so many people. We're getting 15 to 20,000 downloads per month. And I know that downloads does not equal the number of people that actually listen to the episode necessarily, but people are listening. I'm getting emails from all over the country and beyond. And so, as long as I'm adding value, which is really the goal, right? After having gone through it myself,
Mhm.
that's what I realized. I just want to add value. I want to give my little piece in this thing we call the college admissions process. And as long as I'm doing that, I'm not going to stop because it's a lot of fun and helping people. There's nothing more noble than that.
Right, right. Oh, absolutely. So then what led you to do the book?
So, probably at about 120 episodes, I was actually doing a presentation to a group of IECs out of California, the Bay Area. And during the Q&A, someone said, and I was thinking about it, but someone said to me, you really have to do a book. You have to take everything that you've learned and just summarize it in a book because, not everybody wants to listen to hundreds of podcast episodes, but they might want to take a book and, read it at their leisure. And so I began that process, and it took about, I would say, a year and a half. I really, did my best to make it a book that people would want to read and learn from. And so, like I said, a year and a half later, it was released back actually in November of 2024, not too long ago.
That's exciting. I think that's so valuable to be able to bring this and distill it and put it in a format that is accessible in a different way. So that makes such a difference. And I think you're coming from your perspective as a principal and as a parent really adds to the value and the message that people, because you're going to be asking questions, you're coming at it from that very personal perspective. And I'm not surprised that this has just taken off the way it has.
Oh,
So, uh,
thank you.
so let's hear about some of these tidbits and pearls of wisdom that you've received as you talk to all of these college admissions people.
Yeah, my pleasure. First off, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. So that's the name of my podcast, the College Admissions Process Podcast. And I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements related to what the book is about as well, which is essentially a summary of all of these conversations. So I'm happy to share it with you today. Now, originally, this presentation, by the way, I know we have a lot of IECs that are listening in. Originally, the presentation was made for students and their families, but I've been actually presenting this to more and more IECs and than families, although that too is on the uptick. So just so everyone knows, at the end there's going to be a QR code to an anonymous form if anybody wants to provide me with feedback in terms of how I can make this better for students and parents, but also for you, the IECs. And so, this presentation, what I do is I explain how it came about, the podcast, the book, and the speaking engagements, and I talk about wanting to teach families about the biggest takeaways from the podcast, which really is the things you control and the things that you don't control in the college admissions process. And I think that if we take the time to really dig deep and understand that, it's going to help our clients, our students, our families go through the process where it would be far less stressful than it certainly was for me and my family, along with many others. So, what's one of the biggest takeaways? So, one of the biggest takeaways is this thing called institutional priorities. The college admissions process, it's so personal, especially if you get a rejection or if you put on a wait list, you think, oh man, was it something that I did on the essay? Maybe it was too many activities, not enough activities, what have you. But the first thing that people really need to understand are these institutional priorities. And when I first started doing this presentation, and I do it pretty regularly, someone gave me great advice on that anonymous form, by the way, which I'll give you the link to at the end. They said, you've interviewed so many people, you have to incorporate messages from the actual reps that you're interviewing into your presentation. So, in terms of institutional priorities, here's what Rick Clark had to say out of Georgia Tech. And by the way, the titles that I have for these people are the titles that they had at the time of being interviewed by me. I know that some of the titles have changed, but I just want to point out that some of the titles may have changed because at the time the ones that are in the presentation is what they were at their specific school. So Rick Clark from Georgia Tech, he was on episodes 92 and 200. Here's what he simply had to say about institutional priorities.
Well, here's one thing is every college, no matter how big or small they are, starts with one very key driver for their institutional priority, and it is called class size. That is institutional priority number one.
So that's going to come into play a lot because I'm going to show a lot of data from the common data set. So that first institutional priority of class size is going to be even more important to understand later on, where I'm showing you schools that, for example, their institutional priority is to admit 2,000 students, yet they get close to 30,000 applications. And proportionally speaking, as many of you know, that is so true for so many schools out there, right? So we just have to keep that in mind that there's an institutional priority in terms of what that freshman class looks like. Now, Jeff Salingo, who coincidentally is coming on next week to speak to me again about his new book, I had him on. He wrote the book, Who Gets In and Why. Here's what Jeff had to say about those institutional priorities.
Probably, the biggest takeaway is that we tend to think admissions is about the students, is about the seniors applying to college. It has everything to do with the college and university and not very much to do with the students at all, right? It is very much a process driven by the colleges and universities. It's about their priorities, and their priorities are delivered through the admissions office. whether that is they want more full payers, they want more kids from a certain geographic part of the country. They could be very narrow in terms of they need a third baseman for the baseball team, things like that. So it is all about their priorities, which is one big takeaway from the book.
I think one of the main things that Jeff pointed out is what I said earlier, which is we take it very personal. It's a very emotional process, but again, it's very much about the institutions and their priorities as well. Like Jeff said, maybe they need a third baseman. Surprise, surprise. Schools are looking for people that could pay the full bill. These are all possibilities in terms of what falls under the umbrella of institutional priorities, which when I present, I just want to make sure people know it, but not just from me, from all the reps that I interview. Now, Kirk Brennan, it took me 2 years, by the way, to get Kirk Brennan on. He's the Associate Dean and Director of Undergraduate Admissions at USC. He was on for episode 283. Let's hear what Kirk had to say.
One notion about priority, though, that comes to mind, I do have targets by school. I'm supposed to enroll a certain number in each of our 17 undergraduate departments or schools that have the departments. And we want that population to represent as many voices as possible. We want it to be geographically diverse, ethnically diverse, religiously diverse, politically diverse. So we have students from all over the world, and we actively look for them all over the world.
So Kirk talks about the fact that he has 17 schools, and there's definitely priorities in terms of how many students he needs to admit with his teams within each of those 17 schools, which I think is something that is important to hear. Now, Jason McGrath, at the time, he was the director of undergraduate admissions at UNC Chapel Hill. He's now back at his alma mater at Worcester, but here's what Jason had to say back in episode 199 about institutional priorities.
I know it's hard for students, right? It's hard to be waitlisted and have to wait for an answer. But as an institution, and I haven't stated this yet here, at Carolina, we have an obligation as a state institution that 82% of our incoming first-year students are North Carolina residents, and only 18% can be non-residents. And so as such, using the wait list allows us to make sure that we're making that number happen and that we're not going to exceed one way or the other. Because there's actually institutionally, there's financial penalties if you exceed those, don't hit those numbers more than 1 year in a row.
So obviously he's talking about the fact that UNC's institutional priority is 18% of out-of-state students. Now, out of that 18%, Jason explained that about 6 or 7% were actually international students. So if you're a student from New York, where I live, and you don't get to UNC Chapel Hill, you may think, again, maybe it was your essay, maybe it was your GPA, your standardized test score, but it might simply be the fact that you don't live in the great state of North Carolina. And if you read the mission and philosophy of UNC Chapel Hill, it really points to the fact that they're there to serve the great people of the awesome state of North Carolina, which I think, we'll come to later on when we're talking about supplemental essays, how important it is to look at the mission and philosophy of each institution to demonstrate your understanding of that institution during the supplemental essay. UT Austin, which is a school that I interviewed not too long ago, their institutional priority, by the way, in terms of out-of-staters is 10%, and the UC schools are also at 18%. When I spoke to Barkley Barton out of UC Berkeley, it was actually UCLA and UC Berkeley, which for a little while they were going a little higher, but they're all now at around 18% in terms of their institutional priorities. So I just think these are things that are really important to know. Now, if you look on the website at Emory University, they put this image on their website to make it clear that the geographic distribution is something that's very important to them. Now, if you look at all of the corners of the United States, you're actually seeing the percentage of students that they admitted. I am more than willing to bet that this is proportionate with the percentage of applications that they get from throughout the country, but they're making it explicit that geographic diversity is also very important to them. Obviously, 27% in the Southeast, where Emory is located, and 18% outside of the United States. So these are just things that I think people really need to be in mind. And the colleges are telling us this if you look at their common data set or even their websites. Now, a word about rankings and the 15% consideration. And the 15% consideration is for people to understand that if you're applying to schools whose acceptance rate is 15% or less, those are reach schools for everyone and anyone. I repeat again, if you are applying to schools that are only admitting 15% or less, I don't care if you're the valedictorian, captain of the soccer team, great standardized test, great GPA, those are reach schools for everyone. And here's where my good friend Tim Fields, who I just saw last month at the NICEACAT conference, here's what he had to say from Emory related to this.
There are over 4,000 college universities in this country. 2,000 offer bachelor's degrees. And for whatever reason, an emphasis is on 100 of those. Most schools in this country admit the majority of people who apply. And so too many times people get caught up in specific type of institutions who have very low admit rates and are wondering why there's so much pressure in this process. There's not a lot of pressure in this process. It only comes if you limit yourself to these schools that everybody's applying to. So keep an open mind, knowing that, you know, there are a lot of schools that can offer you a great opportunity as far as an education.
So what Tim talked about, over 4,000 colleges and universities, right? But we're only looking at those 100 or less. And I know I can't see everyone out there, but I'm willing to bet that if I could see you right now, you're probably squinting, trying to see, okay, there's a list there of the 25 best colleges in the United States. We're so obsessed with rankings that you're probably trying to see what those schools are. And it's purposely, not so easily legible. But the other thing that I want you to understand in terms of understanding competitive pools, here's a school that I did not too long ago. It's just an example. Whether you have students that apply to Notre Dame or not, these are real numbers, proportionately speaking. Their freshman class, in terms of their institutional priority, they're looking to admit just over 2,000 students. They actually receive 30,000 applications. They admit approximately 3,300 because their acceptance rate is 11%, to come up with that yield, to come up with that freshman class. So I talk a lot to the reps about what about the first 30%? What about the first 30% that are actually rejected? How different is their profile from other students? And the reps tell me time and time again, they could fill 2, maybe even 3 classes with the amount of applications they get. So again, I share this data. I share these little sound bites because I love for my students and my families to understand that although the college admissions process seems very personal, oftentimes it has nothing to do with you, students. Now, look, if you have a 74 average and you have a 1100 on the SAT, chances are you're probably not going to get accepted to Yale University or Stanford. But like I said earlier, there are so many students that are rejected whose profile, academically, activities, is so similar to the students that were admitted. But again, it comes down to those institutional priorities. Now, this is a slide that I'm going to show again later on, but I just want to emphasize, this is from the common data set. Here's the University of Michigan, who, by the way, I just had Jody Gore on from the University of Michigan. They just announced that they're going to have an early decision round, and the conversation with Jody was phenomenal. But they receive 87,000 plus applications. They offered acceptance to 15,700 and change. The number of students who actually enrolled was about 7,400. But get this, if you look where I circled in red, the number of qualified applicants offered a place on the wait list, 21,000 plus. So they gave more students a wait list spot than the number of students that they admitted. Think about that for a second. And the number of applicants accepting a place on the wait list, it was just over 15,000. Well, guess what? In 2023, which was the latest data that I found, and I have to check the common data set again for any updates, but in that year, using this data, how many students out of 15,000 plus were accepted or given a spot from the wait list? 77. Not 77%, folks, 77. So another thing I talk about is looking at the common data set to give you more and more insight in terms of, what the schools are telling us. And they're telling us a lot, and there'll be more about the common data set later on. So what do we control? Obviously, we control the academic fit, the social fit, financial, location. I know that I'm speaking to a lot of IECs, so I'm sure that you talk to your parents about using the net price calculator. How many times I hear a story about a child who actually gets into a school only to find out that they can't afford it, which is a tragedy. So many of the reps talk about please, please, please use the net price calculator. But it's also important to find the right academic fit. One of my students, a former student who actually graduated college at this point, but he came on early in the podcast. I had a series where I interviewed 5 student athletes. So Jack knew that he wanted to play lacrosse at Yale very early in his high school career. Little did I know at the time, he was already committed and it was a little bit of a secret. But what Jack explained to me in his conversation, he really talked about the importance of academic fit, even as a student athlete. He said, because here I am, I'm excited to go to Yale. And by the way, Jack was extremely bright. But he went to Yale. He was there to play lacrosse. And this thing called the pandemic happened in his first year as a freshman. And all of a sudden, he found himself with no lacrosse season. And he, to quote Jack, he said, and now I'm in the classroom with all of the valedictorians and salutatorians from throughout the country and beyond. And again, Jack did extremely well. He's a brilliant kid. But his point is well taken. It's very important to talk about academic fit, whether you're an athlete or not, but also that social fit. Do you want to be close to home, far from home, airplane right away, within 2 hours driving distance? These are things that so many people take for granted. And I will tell you that I'm finishing the UCLA Extension program. And as part of my practicum, I'm doing something a little unique where I'm interviewing students who have completed at least 1 year of college. And those interviews are going to be podcast interviews, but it's also part of my practicum through UCLA. And what I found was many of the students actually transferred, and it was wonderful because we were able to unpackage the anatomy of their transfer. Like, why the transfer? Was there something that happened that you could have done differently as you were doing your college search? And for some students, the answer is yes, and for others, not at all. It was actually very strategic, why they ended up transferring. But my point being is that for those students who, reflected and thought, yes, I would have done things differently, you could imagine that basically they really didn't take the time to consider all of these different types of fit. It was more about where are my friends going? Where did my parent go and stuff like that. So it's important to take these things into consideration. Obviously, we want to have a balanced list of likely schools, right? Where you exceed their mid 50, target schools where perhaps you match it, and of course those reach schools where you're below the mid 50. And so I always talk to parents and students about don't be overly ambitious, or lack self-esteem. You want to find a balance. So these are just numbers. Don't be overly ambitious where you're not applying to any likely school, maybe just 2 target schools, and all the schools you're applying to are reach schools. Now, listen, hopefully you get into wherever you want to go, but it goes back to what I said earlier. If you're only applying to schools with a 15% or less admissions rate, I explained why it is a reach school for everyone. There's no guarantees, regardless of what your profile is. But also, don't lack the self-esteem where you're not applying to any reach, maybe only 1 target, and everything is just likely school, right? You want to find that balance. So I use this just as an example. It's basically a bell curve. I put it there as an example as 262 in terms of likely target and reach. It could be 369, whatever it is, right? Whatever the number is. But the prudent and practical student, we'll do something like this where it'll look like a bell curve. And I always talk about the fact that most students, they actually get into their target school, typically speaking, generally speaking. So, be aware of that. So what else do you control in the college admissions process? Well, I like to talk to families about the fact that the college application is a marketing package where you, the student, are the marketer, but you're also the product. So many students have a very difficult time with that because they've never had to put a comprehensive marketing package together, particularly about themselves. But that's exactly what it is. You are marketing yourself. So you are the marketer and you are the product. And when I make these presentations, I think it's very important for people to understand that you have multiple parts of the overall application. Each part, you have to know exactly what it is intended for, how it is to complement the other areas, and how you're not looking to repeat in multiple areas. For example, and we'll talk more about it later, if you're a student who's an excellent English student and you're the editor of the school newspaper and there's a magazine and you're the editor of the school magazine and your personal statement is only talking about the fact that you like to write with not much more substance where, someone would learn something new about you after reading that personal statement, it's a missed opportunity. So we're going to unpackage each part here, keeping in mind that in reality, the college admissions reps tell me that they're looking for two main things. Number one, can you handle the work? They are admissions counselors. They want to admit you. They really do. They're really nice people. But they don't want to admit anyone unless, number one, they know that when you're on their campus, you can handle the rigors of their academic challenges because they not only want you to come to school and handle it, they're worried about retention rates. Guess what? Colleges are also worried about their graduation rates. So that is the number one thing, right? And the transcript is the number one piece when it comes to the overall academic standing. That's what so many of the reps repeat. The other thing that they're looking for is the type of community member you're going to be, the type of classmate you're going to be, the type of roommate you're going to be. Those are things that are very important to add to their overall community. So let's break it down a little bit and talk a little bit about the transcript. The beauty about the transcript is that at the time that you're submitting your application, there's really not much more you can do about the fact that you got these grades in ninth grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade. Of course, you want to make sure that you continue with that rigor because schools do see the work in progress in 12th grade. But here's what Leticia, who's no longer with UC Davis, but at the time, Leticia Garay was with UC Davis. Here's what she had to say about when they review transcripts.
We are using a GPA, but it is not as shown on your transcript. So this applies to the entire UC system in that we calculate our own GPA using grades earned from summer after ninth grade all the way through summer after 11th grade. We still ask for students to report 9th and 12th grade courses and grades for 9th grade, but we use it more as a trend to see like where the student or how the student has progressed throughout their years and not calculated in the GPA.
So something very important that she pointed out is that although they look in their holistic process, although they are looking at the ninth grade grades, they recalculate the GPA on the transcript, and this is for the entire UC system, but they recalculate the grades in 10th grade and 11th grade, right? They look at ninth grade, they see it, it's part of the review, but in terms of when they are recalculating the 10th and 11th grade. Now, the same is true, by the way, for Carnegie Mellon and Emory. Same exact thing. They look at the ninth grade, it's there, they see it, but they recalculate for the purpose of, redoing the GPA 10th and 11th grade. Now, another great follow-up question, because this is another thing when I'm presenting to students and parents, another great follow-up question here is, when you recalculate, are you recalculating all of my grades, or are you looking just at the core subjects? And that varies from school to school. So if this is a conversation that you have with an admissions rep, it's a fair question to ask. So, that was Leticia. And a word about the context of what your school offers and knowing your own school. There's a thing called the school profile. Every single high school sends this document called the school profile to the admissions reps. And this allows the admissions reps to really learn the context of what your high school has to offer. I recently did a presentation for parents and students from Lynbrook High School out of San Jose, California. And so I just used this as an example in terms of showing what a school profile looks like. So you could see, the class of 24, what the post-graduation plans were, how many went to 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, and on and on. You could see the ELA, math scores. Here's just some general demographic information, average class size, student to counselor ratio, AP score summaries, SAT, ACT score summaries, and on and on. And so knowing your school profile is very important. I think advising students to see it and their parents, just so they get a general idea of what the admissions rep is seeing in addition to their college application. And here's what my good buddy Barkley Barton had to say about it out of UPenn. He was back on episode 166 of the podcast.
A comprehensive review looks at a student's application from several different perspectives. We review the academic curriculum through the lens of the student's high school. I think I need to say that again, through the lens of a student's high school. How they have engaged through your extracurricular activities, both inside and outside of the classroom, a student's personal information. What the context that they share with us, the recommendations that people like yourselves, the principals, the counselors, the teachers share with us. And last but not least are their essays. Their essays really do help us gain insight to who they are.
So again, the context of your high school. So many people say, well, our high school offers 10 advanced placement courses, but the school down the block, and there's always a school down the block, they offer 15. So those kids are at an advantage. No, they look at your school and they evaluate your application based on the context of your high school. So the age-old question, would you rather see a student earn an A in regular courses or a B in honors or AP courses? And I share this because I recently had David DeCour Jackson out of MIT, and here's what he had to say about that. This is a typical question that, parents in my own high school ask all the time.
A question that gets asked is, do students have to have all A's? Well, I mean, you don't have to have all A's, but it's better if you do. And actually, one of the favorite questions that I've been asked is, would you rather see someone get all A's, in regular courses, or, a B in an honors course or an AP course? And I would rather them get an A in an AP course,
Right.
and so there's no
Right.
reason why somebody taking a more rigorous course shouldn't perform. So we do want students to perform well in a rigorous curricula.
So one of my favorite episodes was episodes 250 because Larry Altman from Michigan State, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have a great idea. I'm going to bring a buddy of mine who's an admissions rep at an Ivy League." He said, "But until I get permission, I'm not even going to tell you which school. Maybe he and I come on and we compare the similarities and differences between an Ivy League school and a big state school like Michigan State." I said, "Larry, that would be phenomenal. Let's make it happen." So episode 250 was Larry and Logan Powell, who's the Dean of Admissions at Brown University. And the same question was asked, and Logan said the same thing as David did here, where, look, if you're applying to the Ivies, yes, they'd rather see you take the AP course or, the higher level course and, while performing extremely well. Again, going back to the fact that they want to ensure that you're able to handle the academic rigors of their campuses. So the activity sheet, just a quick note here. We think all of a sudden that it has to be the soccer, the DECA club, the chess club, the theater, music, and all of that obviously is very, very important. But when I interviewed Andrea Flores, and it wasn't only Andrea, she's out of FSU, Florida State University. So many reps talk about if you're a student that has to work after school, it is so important to include that on your activity sheet because if you're working to help the family, most likely that's the reason why you're not in 3, 4, 5 activities after school. So anything that you don't put in the overall application, you're now leaving it to an admissions representative who, by the way, they're human beings. AI is not reviewing applications, right? It's a human being on the other side. Don't leave it to them to speculate as to why you might not have as many activities as someone else if in fact you're working. Now, think about it. Working, you have to show up, you have to deal with a boss, you have to, perform. And there's a lot of leadership that's shown in working. So things like that, things like if you're on a city bus for an hour each way to go to and from school, that's another example of something that should be indicated in there, again, to give the admissions rep the context of who you are as a person, right? They want to look at the context of your high school, but it's important that you make sure that you're given the context of your situation. Maybe you're someone that has to take an elderly relative to the doctors because you're the person that's going to translate for that relative. That's something that, they should know about because there's a lot of love and respect and leadership in doing things like that. So these are some examples that reps have shared with me regarding the activity sheet, in addition to the traditional athletics, theater, music, and on and on. So I like to point out the common essay prompts just to remind students that there's 7, and number 7, by the way, is always pick a topic of your own. But look at this. I highlight all the words here where it's you, your, yourself, because it's very important in the common application for students. I'm sorry, for the essay, for students to understand that they have to talk about themselves. You're going to hear from some reps in a minute where one of the biggest mistakes is that rather than talking about yourself, you're speaking about someone else for 90% of the time, and there's very little said about you, the student, which is a big mistake, and we'll hear more about in a second. So here's what Jua Howard had to say about loved ones and sports injuries, which, by the way, are the 2 most common topics in the personal essay. Jua is out of UC Berkeley. By the way, UC Berkeley, I know, has PIQs, doesn't have personal statements, but the bottom line is it's very important to portray information about yourself as opposed to writing 95% about someone else. And here's what Gio had to say out of UC Berkeley.
I'll say this as well, and this is going back to our previous question about what students do that's kind of something to avoid. To your point, John, about this is our chance again of learning more about you. Students a lot of times will talk about somebody else. That's not the
Right,
goal.
right.
If you want to talk about someone who, a loved one, I love those. I love those responses, but it needs to be like, I always say maybe 10% that person, 90% you, 15% at the max for that person. Set it up who they are, the dynamic of your relationship, but then you need to shift it back to your point. You said the word, John, reflection. Reflect on that relationship. What have you learned as a result of this relationship? Maybe they've inspired you, and then maybe that inspired you to, be a part of something or to create a business or an organization or whatever. And that helps me learn then more about you, even though that person is really the impetus of that.
Right. And so because I mentioned the PIQs, I also interviewed Carly Brockett, Deputy Director of Undergraduate Admissions at UCLA, episode 203. Here's what Carly had to say about a PIQ in terms of giving some insight on how to approach it.
So something might have happened to you when you were 8. That's okay to share, but really expand upon why you're telling us about it now. So I often say use the 25% of the word count to tell us about 8-year-old, but then the rest of the word count about you now and how that has carried over or impacted, because we're wanting to know about you now. And I think that is something that sometimes can be hard to do.
So you could see the common themes from the different reps, right? In other words, with the personal statement, first of all, the two biggest topics are sports injuries and talking about a loved one. With a sports injury, I love soccer. I played soccer. I got hurt. I stopped playing soccer. And that was really it. They talk about, what was your thought process? What was your reflection? How did it make you better? How did you overcome, where's the grit that you showed? You have to give something more than just what happened. Jua talked about the fact that, you talk 90% about a loved one, and maybe you're talking about grandma. We now want to admit grandma, but we learned nothing new about you. Carly's example, where you're talking about something that happened to you when you were 8 years old, in eighth grade, whatever it was, that's fine to set the table, to set the context in terms of what the essay is going to be about. But don't make that be 90% of what you're writing about. Something happened to me when I was 8 years old. Okay, what does that mean now? Again, what was your reflection? How did you grow? What does it mean now? Tell us about you now. So I share these common themes because I think it's important when we're working with students for them to understand this. Again, not for me, but straight from the admissions reps that ultimately make the decisions. Now, some examples that have come up really quick in terms of essay topics, because a lot of people ask me, what should we write about? And the truth of the matter is, you could write about anything, but you want to be creative in that writing to make sure that you're giving something new about yourself. Remember, the whole marketing package, it's important to know what each piece means, how they have to complement each, the transcript, the activity sheet, personal statement, supplemental, standardized tests, and on, but how they build upon the next. It's very important. So some examples, the dining room table. Somebody wrote about the dining room table. What did they write? Well, they wrote about how the dining room, if the dining room table could talk about the love, could talk about the arguments, could talk about the progression of conversations over the years for that family, the holidays, the good times, the bad times. And so you get an idea of, a very clever way of using something like the dining room table as part of a personal statement. Similar to that, being driven to school and the evolution of those conversations. So this young lady spoke about how her father always took her to school, and the evolution of those conversations from when she was in elementary school through now where she's about to apply to college. A family recipe, very common, right? Maybe it's a dish that's very common to the culture of your family. And this kid took each ingredient and used each ingredient to say a little something about herself. For example, when you bite this certain thing, initially it's subtle, but then you feel the little spice. And so you could imagine she used each ingredient to build upon the understanding of who she was. One of my favorites was from RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. Krispy Kreme donuts. A student used to go to Krispy Kreme to watch the donuts being made. But one donut came out looking a little different than the rest. And so she wanted that donut. She said, I want that donut. And you could imagine she used that donut, that analogy, that metaphor to explain, who she is as a person, right? And I always, when I'm talking to students and parents, I always point out Johns Hopkins University and Hamilton College, regardless of whether you're applying to those schools or not, if you search either college and then essays that worked, they both have a list of essays from students that were admitted that gave permission to have their essays, their personal statements published on the website. So again, if you just search Johns Hopkins University or Hamilton College, essays that worked, it's actually a great free resource in terms of just seeing more examples of college essays that worked. And so the supplemental essay and demonstrating, your understanding. I touched upon this a little earlier, but when I'm talking to students and parents, I talk about the nuance, the difference, and it comes out time and time again in the conversations that I'm having with all of these admissions reps. In a supplemental, they want to know that you can demonstrate your understanding of the institution. What is the mission? What is the philosophy? And by the way, I always recommend reading the mission and philosophy statement, but demonstrate that you understand it. And then if you could talk about what you've done in high school that's in line with it and what you intend to do, because listen, we're applying to college, right? So we're not done. But if you could demonstrate what you intend to do that's in line with all of that, no guarantees that you're going to get into any school. But if you're able to do that, for that portion of the application, you're going to put yourself in a better light as opposed to writing a supplemental essay, why NYU, why New York University, and then change the name of the school and just use it for all schools. So you could do that with the personal statement, right? You could use one personal statement because that's really, giving insight in terms of who you are. But with the supplemental essay, again, demonstrating your understanding of that specific institution, what have you done in high school that's in line with that? And what do you intend to continue to do? If you can do that, that's how you're going to use that portion of the essay in the best light. And here's what Ian Shackner, by the way, whether you're applying to Cornell University or not, Ian was brilliant in explaining so many of these little nuances. He was on for episodes 14, and he was on not too long ago with episode 240. Here's what Ian had to say.
I know some people get advice where they say, list the names of the courses that interest you most. A lot of our programs, we don't like that at all. We call it the Google rule. Don't put anything in your essay that just shows you can find the name of something.
Right.
Google's
Right.
amazing. You can find the name of anything. So if we're continuing with this theme of marketing package, it's not about a good use of space. It's about the best use of space. The best use of space is not telling a school about itself. And through exciting classes like Intro to Conflict Resolution and Advanced Dispute Resolution, we know what we teach. We know what we teach. Don't tell us you did your research by telling us about ourselves. Show us. Show us by connecting with the issues, the topics you'll study in our program. The reason I mention that in the context of what we just discussed is sometimes people will just find the name of something and they miss the part where, man, that professor retired. I mean, he's emeritus. He's not teaching anymore. Or they found the page for a certain institute, but that institute has been on hiatus while the professor. So nothing's been posted about that institute in 3 years. So sometimes they found something on the site, they write about it, but they miss that part. So again, we want to make sure the student's happy, and we're like, they can't wait to do research with a professor that's retired for 3 years. Occasionally comes back and lectures, so we keep them on there.
Yeah, so, very important, demonstrating your understanding, right? And so letters of recommendation, I'll just move along quickly here. I'll share my favorite, right? Because many of us, I'm sure, write letters. Obviously, it's very important not to write something that is so easily found on the activity sheet and the transcript. If a student is a great English student, we'll use that example of the editor of the school newspaper. If I happen to be the advisor and all I'm writing about is how strong academically he or she is and the fact that they're my editor, I'm really not adding anything new. My favorite letter that I ever wrote was a while back. Actually, the student just got married. I happen to be very friendly with his family. I'm sitting right here. This is my office as a high school principal. Student knocks on the door. I actually didn't knock, well, knocked on the door. The door was open. Comes in and says, Dr. Durante, can I just give you something? I'm like, yeah, sure, come on in. He was in 10th grade at the time. And he puts on my desk a $100 bill and says, I want to make sure this gets back to the rightful owner. True story. $100 bill on my desk. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I just found it in the hallway. It was 6:30 in the morning. It was well before school started. But students, believe it or not, come in that early in my building. And long story short, guess what? We did get it back to the rightful owner. But I told that kid right then and there, I said, when it's time, I want to write your letter of recommendation because I want to share this story. I want to talk about your integrity, your intent of just getting it back to the rightful owner. That is something that is so amazing. And he did not do it for that reason, by the way. But I truly said to him, I want to write on your behalf. And of course, I wrote about that story and so much more. And, he was a brilliant kid who went on to do great things and whatever. But I say that because, again, building upon each piece. Don't just repeat what's on a transcript or an activity sheet. And here's what David Ducour, again from MIT, had to say about it.
And we specifically, while we don't require it, we do require two recommendations, and we prefer one from a STEM recommender and one from a non-STEM recommender. And part of that is that those two are likely to say different things. They're going to give us different perspectives. But if somebody gives us a physics and a calculus, they're both probably going to speak about problem solving, which is useful, but you've duplicated it. And we're getting the same message, and there's some additional insight that we could have gotten that we didn't get.
So to his point, try, right? There's nothing wrong, by the way, with having your physics teacher and your calculus teacher write a letter of recommendation. But to his point, if you have a STEM teacher and a non-STEM teacher, hopefully, by definition, they're writing about different things as opposed to writing only about analytical skills, if you will, right? So it's really just approaching it where each piece, you have two letters, make sure the two letters are saying two different things while adding to your overall application. A quick word about standardized tests. If schools report that they are test optional, guess what? They are test optional, and we're going to see some data from the common data set. We all know that there's a lot of schools that went back to offering tests, the more competitive for the most part. But basically, they say if you're on the high end, because another question is, should I submit scores? What admissions reps say in my conversations with them is if you're in the high end of the mid 50 or higher, then certainly, submit your score. But obviously that's case by case. But what I would say is that if a school reports that they are in fact test optional, usually in most of the schools, because I asked them, well, what's the percentage of students that you admitted that didn't submit test scores? In most cases, it's a 50-50 split, maybe 60-40. But the point is that if they're reporting being test optional, the data shows that they're not lying. That's the point. And just to emphasize that point a little more, here's Tulane University, their common data set. By the way, students who applied, 27,000 plus, students who were admitted, just over 4,000, students that actually enrolled, 1,867. But what I circle on the bottom there basically points to the fact that approximately 45% of the enrolled students submitted a standardized test. So a lot of times people think like even a competitive school like Tulane, no way, everybody submits their scores, but the data on the common data set shows very different information. The common data set, I love it because it shows other things as well. Here's an example from Notre Dame. When it comes to standardized test scores, you could see I circled it. Basically, this page on the common data set talks about all the different parts of an application, and basically the colleges rank whether it's a very important, considered or not considered at all. And, for standardized tests, you can see clearly it's considered, right? But it's not very important like the high school transcript, for example. This is going back to the University of Michigan. Again, the number of people that they had on their wait list and that come off it. I can tell you that from the University of Michigan, every year I get students that come to my office that are kind of depressed because, they're waitlisted from the University of Michigan. Is there anything you could do? Could we write? Could we this? Could we that? And based on my conversation that I just had with Jody Gore, by the way, University of Michigan doesn't want to hear from us at that point in time. If you're on the wait list, unless they specifically ask you for something, they just want to know whether you want to keep your spot on the wait list or not. They're not really looking for, the principal to say how wonderful he or she is, and please reconsider. They're not really looking at that point in time. So final thoughts. I know I don't have to share this too much with this group because you're a bunch of professionals, but research schools with an open mind. Look at that fit. Don't just look at that list of 25 top schools. We want to have that likely target and reach list. Again, ensure that all parts of your application complement each other while building on each other. focus on what you control and what you don't control, and try to enjoy the journey. Here's just a message from Jason McGrath that I'd like to share.
I think it's the only question I can think of, and I don't know if it's so much a question as a statement I forgot to mention during the discussion on how students put their applications together. And that is to remember not to try to package yourself in a way that you think is what we want. As you're telling your story, that is what we want to hear. If you tell us or try to sound like what you think we're looking for, or what you think a typical Carolina student is, and I would argue there really isn't a typical Carolina student, other than passionate about Carolina Blue, the reality is if you start to package yourself in those ways, you'll probably start to sound like a lot of other applicants, as opposed to being authentically yourself. And at least if you know you put your authentic self as an applicant forward, you would never have any regrets when the process is done. Because if we don't find in you what you hope we will, then you shouldn't come here anyway, right? Because you deserve to go somewhere that finds the values in what you offer and sees the good fit. So you'll thrive and they'll benefit from you. And so I hate to say it's our loss, but I mean, it's one of those situations where you're better off to put yourself, together authentically than to overpackage.
So Jason said this, as did Christoph Gutentag, from Dean of Admissions from Duke. He talked about, don't approach the college admissions process where you're trying to look like students that were admitted. Because if you do that, you're going to sound like a lot of other students in this very competitive thing that we call the college admissions process. So they really emphasize your unique voice, your unique self. So we're just about done. I just want to share two quick resources. The first is, someone gave me a great idea. They said, look, your episode number 240 is no more or less important than number 294. So why don't you create a list of all of the schools that you've interviewed, linking each of them so that it serves as a sort of virtual college fair. And so this QR code is basically to just that. It's the list of all of the schools that I've interviewed. And if you click on any of the schools, it brings you to the audio conversation. And what I love about it, obviously, it's an on-demand document. Feel free to share it if you can, if you wish. And I love, love, love when a parent emails me saying, we were driving to the University of Pittsburgh, and on our way there, we listened to the episode. We didn't see the actual rep that you interviewed, but when we got to the admissions office, we were able to come up with better follow-up questions based on what we had heard throughout that conversation. So it was something that added value to that family and many others. So I just wanted to share that QR code with you in case you wanted to see it. And lastly, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Cyndy. Thank you to all of you for allowing me to come on. That's the name of the podcast. This QR code is to that anonymous form. Like I said, I'm not collecting email addresses there. It's just give me straight feedback. Tell me that it was awful. Tell me that it was good. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you didn't like, because I'm getting more and more opportunities to do speaking engagements. And I really want to make this presentation better and better each time. And so if you could take 3 minutes to fill out that form, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. That is really great. And everyone, I would encourage you to scan the QR code. Feedback as a presenter is always so valuable. Also, we've got the link to John's podcast in the chat. If somebody wants to look up his book on Amazon, we can put that in, and I'll have those in the show notes as well. So we have a couple of questions. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to run these questions by you, John, and then I have a question for you. So, Phil, when you were talking about GPA, so Phil asked, with recalculation of GPAs, what is the process? I've heard about the Exeter 12-point system, and is that what they use? Have you heard about the Exeter 12-point system?
So that hasn't come up. That specific, the Exeter 12-point system has not come up. In most cases, they're recalculating on a 4-point scale. So what comes up is the fact that high schools, like my high school actually, is on an 8-point scale. Many are on a 4-point, many are on a 12-point, many are on a 100-point, many are numeric, many are alpha. There's literally hundreds of variations. And that's the reason why when you're reviewing applications from hundreds, if not thousands of high schools, they want to, kind of level the playing field and they do recalculate. And so I would say in just about all of the cases when they're recalculating on a 4-point scale is what they talk about.
Mhm.
And in terms of, who's looking at the ninth grade as part of the calculation, who's not, who's looking only at core subjects or everything, it really varies. But I mention all of that because anyone that's speaking to a rep from a specific school, hopefully it's prompting, more higher order thinking type questions, when you're asking related questions about GPA.
Right, right. So then Jamie asked on the supplemental, the YS college essay, can you elaborate on how do students demonstrate how they understand the college in the YS essay? So they're not citing that professor or that class or that institute that's no longer really active or viable. So are there other examples of things students can do?
So I think it's all of the things that you would do under demonstrating your interest. Now, many, many schools, especially the competitive ones, are not tracking demonstrating your interest in terms of whether or not they're going to accept you, right? But if you are visiting, if you are in the virtual tours, the webinars, if you will, you're learning things about the school. And if there's something that resonates with you, something that can demonstrate that you really understand why specifically you want to be in that program, and you're able to, again, explain it, demonstrate that you understand it, give insights into what you've done in high school that's in line with it, that's going to put you in a better light to show that you've actually done your homework. So my advice would be under the umbrella of demonstrating interest. Forget about whether schools use it or not for the application review in terms of you being admitted or not. And most don't, by the way. But um, when you do all of those things, you learn a lot about an institution and showing that, as Ian said from Cornell, don't just Google something. We could all Google. Don't tell us what we teach. We know what we teach. It has to have substance. And so that's, the best advice I could give with that to make sure that you're standing out as opposed to, again, writing one supplemental answer for NYU and then trying to use that for every other school, right? That would be a
Yeah.
mistake.
So saying, gee, I want to go to NYU or Chicago or Boston because you're in Chicago or Boston, NYU is
Right,
just not good enough. I
right.
just don't
Not good enough.
understand that at all.
Exactly.
So here's one last question from Sharon, and then I'm going to ask my question, and then we're going to go. In this ever-changing landscape, and especially, you've done several interviews over the last 6 months, right? Do you have a sense of whether colleges want students to write about their race or ethnicity, or just leave it out?
I get a sense that they absolutely do. And I think that if you look at their missions and philosophies, they talk about wanting to have a diverse freshman class, which is a very vague statement. But my sense, my honest, sense after talking to so many people is that they absolutely want to hear about your lived experience, whatever it is, whether it's race, socioeconomic status, gender, identity, whatever it is, they absolutely want to hear about it. I definitely get that sense for sure.
I agree. I agree. We're seeing even now, as we're after August, but approaching September, a lot of supplementals, they are changing the wording slightly, but it's still focusing, as you showed, on you and on what experiences students have and what their authentic. And that's another term, and that's in some ways it's become really overused. It's become a cliche, but being able to share that. So my last question is, what surprised you the most when you started talking to these college admissions? And also, by the way, I know you've interviewed Jeffrey Salingo, you've interviewed a lot of different people that are connected or interested in higher education, but are not just college admissions. So I would encourage people to look at all the different interviews you've done. But so what's one thing that surprised you the most?
There's a lot of things, but the first thing that comes to mind is just the fact that there are so many families that are afraid to reach out to the admissions reps because they feel that maybe it's going to put their child in a bad light with the college. And I have to say, the people are so wonderful. They're so welcoming. They want to answer your questions. They want to help you. And so I think that's what surprises me is that too many people feel that they're not accessible, and they truly are. I mean, look, don't write them an email asking a question that is easily found on their website. You want to do your homework. You want to show that you did a little bit of research and you want to ask a thoughtful question. And if you do that, they are so accessible. They really want to help you. Like I said earlier, they're admissions counselors. They want to admit you, they want to help you, they want to support you. And so that's one of the many things that surprised me is that people hesitate to reach out when in fact they're so welcoming and willing and able to help you.
I think that's great. I think that we as professionals take that into account too, because oftentimes we are afraid to reach out. And so many colleges are welcoming of anyone from a school, public, private, IECs. There are a little bit of a handful of schools that won't work or communicate with IECs, but that's the exception rather than the rule. So John, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your time, your insights, your candidness, your animation. That's what makes your presentation so good, is being able to have that perspective. And so I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. It's been a very lively group. I've loved seeing all the comments and interaction. Next weekend is Labor Day weekend, so we won't have a Friday forum then, but I'll be coming back in September. We're going to be talking to Murphy Miller from NACAC. I'm going to be doing a lot of different things. Harlan Cohen's going to come on at the end of September, so we're going to talk about transition. So just lots of great things. And as always, if you have a suggestion or someone that you would like to hear on the Friday forum, just drop me an email. So thank you, John. Hope you have a great weekend. Hope you have a great start to the school. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. I hope you have a great weekend as well.